Okay, so ready to dive into something pretty deep today.
Always up for a good deep dive.
Yeah, we're going to be talking about this whole idea of building for the kingdom.
Okay.
It's kind of a phrase you hear tossed around,
Mhm.
but we're going to try to really unpack it. And we're doing it based on N.T. Wright's book, Surprised by Hope, which is, I don't know about you, but I found it a pretty mind-blowing read.
Oh, yeah. A fantastic book. Very thought-provoking.
Yeah.
And of course, N.T. Wright himself, I mean, for folks who might not be familiar with his work, he's kind of a big deal in the world of New Testament scholarship, right? I
Yeah.
mean, he was the Bishop of Durham for a while. And before that, he held positions at Cambridge, McGill, Oxford. Like, the guy knows his stuff when it comes to understanding the scriptures, especially the New Testament.
Absolutely. And that's why I think tackling this question of building for the kingdom with him as our guide is it's going to be a really fruitful conversation. And I think it's a question a lot of us have probably wrestled with at some point, you know? Like, what does it actually mean for us here and now in our everyday lives to be involved in this whole idea of building God's kingdom? I mean, we first hear that phrase, building God's kingdom. It can sound kind of, I don't know, almost a little presumptuous. Like, who are we to think we can build anything for God?
Yeah, it can definitely sound a little, I don't know, maybe even arrogant on the surface, right? Like, are we really trying to take over God's job? And the funny thing is, that's exactly the kind of reaction Wright addresses right off the bat in the book.
Yeah, he really does. He's very clear right from the start.
Yeah.
God is the builder of his kingdom. There's no question about that.
Right.
But what he then goes on to say is that God has designed the world and designed us in a way that his work in the world is actually carried out through us, through humanity.
Mm-hmm.
And this goes back to that foundational truth that we're made in God's image. It's not just some nice theological idea. Wright really sees it as the key to understanding our role in God's plan.
Exactly. And I love how he emphasizes the practical implications of that, of being made in God's image. It's not just about looking a certain way. It's about reflecting God's character, his creativity, his love, his justice, all of that into the world around us. So what you do, how you live, it's not just about you. It's part of this bigger story that God is weaving.
And that connects to this idea of stewardship, right?
Yeah.
We often talk about being stewards of creation, but Wright takes it a step further, linking it back to our original purpose before the disaster of rebellion and corruption, as he puts it. And through Jesus and the Holy Spirit, that original purpose of reflecting God's image and partnering with him in the world, it gets restored.
It's like we're invited back into this incredible partnership with God to participate in his ongoing work of healing and renewal in the world. And what's really interesting is how Wright tackles that potential objection some folks might have. You know, the one that sounds all humble and pious on the surface. Oh, we can't possibly build God's kingdom. That's his job. We're just lowly humans. He suggests that sometimes that kind of thinking can actually be a way of avoiding responsibility.
Oh, that's really interesting. So it's not that we should shy away from acknowledging our limitations, but we also shouldn't use that as an excuse to sit on the sidelines and not engage with the work God is calling us to. Now, one thing Wright is very careful to do is distinguish between our present efforts, our building work, and the ultimate final form of the kingdom. We're not talking about us somehow building heaven on earth, are we?
No, not at all. He makes it very clear that the final coming together of heaven and earth, that new heavens and new earth we read about in the scriptures, that's entirely God's doing. It's his supreme act of new creation. Think about the resurrection of Jesus. That's the prototype, the ultimate example of what God's new creation will be like. And Wright is very clear. God alone will bring that about. It's almost, well, it would be foolish to think we could somehow assist God in that final act. It's just on a completely different scale.
So our role is not to create the final product, but to participate in the process, to be involved in the work that's leading towards that ultimate goal.
Exactly. It's about understanding our actions in the present as followers of Jesus, empowered by the Spirit, as building for the kingdom, even though we're not building the kingdom itself. And that leads us to that really powerful passage in 1 Corinthians 15.58, which gets quoted a lot in these kinds of discussions.
Yeah, that's a verse that comes up a lot, and for good reason. So
Yeah.
the context there is Paul has just laid out this incredibly detailed, thorough argument for the resurrection, which is, of course, the foundation of Christian hope.
Right. It's the ultimate promise for believers that death is not the end.
Right. So you might think, okay, if that's the case, the logical conclusion is just kind of kick back, relax, and wait for the good stuff to happen in the future. Why bother doing much of anything now?
Yeah, that would be the natural human inclination, wouldn't it? Future secured, time to coast.
Exactly. But Paul, he does the exact opposite. He says, and this is so powerful, "Therefore, my beloved ones, be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, because you know that in the Lord your labor is not in vain." It's like he's saying, the very fact that you have this future hope, this assurance of the resurrection, that should be the fuel that drives you to work even harder, to be even more committed to what God is doing in the world right now.
It's like the most powerful motivator for action isn't just about future reward, but about the present eternal value of what you do now.
It's so counterintuitive, but when you really think about it, it makes so much sense. It's not about earning your salvation or anything like that. It's about recognizing that your actions in the present have a significance that it extends far beyond this life. And Wright really unpacks what this work of the Lord actually looks like. And it's not just the traditional religious activities, right?
No, absolutely not. He gives this really broad, inclusive list of examples: painting, preaching, singing, sewing, praying, teaching, building hospitals, digging wells, campaigning for justice, writing poems, caring for the needy, loving your neighbor. It's like this beautiful tapestry of human activity, all of it seen through the lens of contributing to God's purposes.
And the thing that is, honestly, I think, kind of mind-blowing when you really grasp it is that Wright is saying these activities, these things we do in the present, they're not just temporary fixes or ways to make life a little better until the real thing comes along. They actually will somehow be part of God's new world.
He uses some really vivid imagery to help us wrap our heads around this. It's not like you're oiling a machine that's about to completely break down, or restoring a painting that's just going to get thrown in a fire, or planting a garden that's going to get dug up the next day. It's like, in a way, we're preparing the ground and planting seeds for a garden that only God can bring to full bloom.
It really changes how we see our everyday lives, doesn't it? Knowing that even those seemingly small, insignificant acts of kindness or creativity or service done with love and faithfulness, they actually have this eternal significance.
It's huge. Now, one thing Wright also does in the book is he points out these two kind of common traps, two extremes that Christians can sometimes fall into when thinking about this whole idea of the kingdom.
Yeah, he talks about these two opposing viewpoints, triumphalism and defeatism.
Right.
And I think it's really helpful to unpack both of those because I think most of us probably lean one way or the other, even if we don't realize it.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's start with triumphalism. That's essentially the view that the main task for Christians is to build the kingdom here on earth, like right now.
Okay.
And it often gets linked to what's called the social gospel, which is this idea that we should be primarily focused on transforming society through social and political and cultural action. The goal is to create essentially a perfect society, a fully realized version of God's kingdom through our own efforts.
And to be fair, I mean, that kind of thinking has led to a lot of positive changes in the world, right? It's motivated people to fight for justice, to work for better social conditions, all sorts of good things. But Wright points out that it ultimately falls short.
Yeah. He observes that, despite all those efforts, the world is still, as he puts it, a fragmented, frightened, and battered world. It hasn't delivered on that promise of a complete, perfect society because, well, as we talked about earlier, that final transformation is God's work, not ours. We can't create that on our own.
And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have defeatism.
Right.
What does that look like?
Defeatism is basically the view that nothing we do really matters until Jesus returns.
Okay.
The problems are just too big, the forces of evil are too entrenched, so why bother?
Right.
And so the focus becomes almost entirely on saving souls for the afterlife, get people into heaven, and then we'll worry about the problems of this world later.
So there's a real disconnect between the spiritual and the material, the present and the future.
Exactly. And Wright argues that this kind of thinking, while it might sound humble, can actually be pretty convenient, especially when you're confronted with really challenging systemic injustices in the world. It allows you to focus on this seemingly more comfortable, less messy realm of personal salvation while kind of neglecting the very real needs and suffering around you.
Right, like it's all going to burn anyway, so why bother trying to fix it?
Yeah, it can be very tempting to take that approach. But Wright sees it as a way of essentially removing God's active, ongoing work of healing and restoration from the present world. The work of the Father, the Son who is already Lord, and the Spirit who's actively at work within creation. It creates this false dichotomy between what God is doing now and what he will do in the future.
So neither of these extremes really aligns with Paul's call to be steadfast and immovable in our work for the Lord, does it? Wright is advocating for this much more nuanced, balanced perspective, right?
Absolutely. He emphasizes that, the early Christians, their belief in Jesus' resurrection, it wasn't just about personal salvation in the future. It was this foundational declaration that Jesus is the Messiah, the rightful Lord of the entire world.
Right.
And if we truly believe that and we pray for God's kingdom to come on earth as it is in heaven, then we can't just sit back and passively watch as injustice and suffering unfold around us. We have to be actively involved in working for what is good and right.
But at the same time, we have to acknowledge, like the defeatist view rightly points out, that the final, complete putting right of everything is still something we're waiting for. It's not something we have the power to achieve on our own.
Exactly. So we need to avoid the arrogance of thinking we can build the kingdom in its fullness through our own power and ingenuity, which is the triumphalist trap. But we also need to reject the passivity of defeatism that says there's no point in even trying to make things better in the here and now.
It's this delicate balance, isn't it?
It really is.
So doing justice, working towards what's good and true and beautiful in the world, that's definitely part of the Christian task. But it's about building for the kingdom, not about constructing the final kingdom itself. That's such a crucial distinction.
It's a really important distinction. It's about recognizing that we have this vital role to play as participants in God's ongoing work in the world. And the incredible thing is, our efforts, when they're empowered by the Spirit and aligned with God's will, they have this significance and impact that stretches far beyond our current understanding. They're actually contributing to this future new creation that God will one day bring about.
And that's just such an amazing and encouraging thought to hold on to.
It really is.
So to kind of sum it all up for our listeners, we've been exploring this idea that while God is ultimately the architect and builder of his kingdom, he intentionally works through us, his image bearers in the world. And our present efforts, when they reflect God's heart, God's will, they're not just temporary ripples. They have this real lasting impact. They're actually contributing to the future new creation that God will one day bring about.
Right.
And it's so important to avoid those two extremes, the overconfidence that we can somehow create a perfect world on our own, and then that apathy that suggests nothing we do really matters.
Right. Right. It's about finding that middle ground where we're actively engaged in the work of the kingdom, but we're doing it with humility, recognizing that we're ultimately working with God, not for God.
That's so good. So I want to leave our listeners with this thought. As you go about your day, your week, whatever you're doing, think about what specific work of the Lord really resonates with you. What are you passionate about? What gifts do you have that you can offer? And how might understanding that even those seemingly small, everyday actions can have this eternal significance, how might that shift your perspective, your engagement with the world, the people around you? What would it look like to live each day knowing that you're not just building a career or a family or a life, but you're actually building for something that will last forever?
That's a great question to ponder. It really invites us to see our lives, even the mundane, everyday parts, as part of something much bigger, something truly meaningful.
Absolutely. And that's what this whole idea of building for the kingdom is all about.
It really is.
So until next time, keep diving deep, keep exploring, and keep building.
And remember, your labor is not in vain.
Absolutely not.